The Galactic Council's main chamber buzzed with the usual mix of languages, clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses that passed for conversation among the 73 represented species. Ambassador Zektar of the Hegemony adjusted his breathing apparatus and glanced at the newcomers section with barely concealed disgust. Humans. The latest species to stumble into galactic civilization and already causing problems. The girl sitting in the human delegation's corner looked impossibly young by galactic standards. Maya Chen couldn't have been more than 20 standard years old, which was practically an infant compared to the centuries-old beings surrounding her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a plain blue uniform that marked her as a junior diplomat from the Terran Federation. What disturbed Zektar most wasn't her youth, but her stillness. While the other human delegates whispered among themselves and took notes on their primitive data tablets, Maya sat perfectly motionless. Her eyes moved occasionally, tracking speakers or scanning the massive domed chamber, but otherwise she remained statue-like in her chair. It was unnatural. Even the most disciplined species showed some sign of life during these lengthy sessions. The crystalline hierarchy constantly shifted their refractive bodies to communicate through light patterns. The gas-form nebula collective swirled and pulsed in response to emotional stimuli. Even the machine intelligence synthesis ticked and whirred as their processing cores analyzed incoming data. But the human girl just sat there, breathing so slowly that Zektar had to focus to see her chest rise and fall. "The matter before us today," announced Supreme Arbiter Vexhan in her melodious tone that automatically translated into every species' preferred communication method, concerns the territorial dispute between the Korthax Empire and the recently contacted human worlds. A ripple of tension passed through the chamber. The Korthax were not known for their diplomatic flexibility. Standing nearly 4 meters tall with chitinous exoskeletons and razor-sharp mandibles, they had built their empire through conquest and maintained it through fear. Their representative, General Thakmor, clicked his mandibles impatiently as he rose to address the assembly. "The matter is simple," Thakmor's translator rendered his clicking speech into Standard Galactic. "The humans have established colonies on 17 worlds within our traditional hunting grounds. These worlds have been marked by Korthax scouts for over 1,000 cycles. The humans must withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Ambassador Sarah Martinez, the head of the human delegation, stood to respond. She was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and the calm demeanor that came from decades of political experience. "With respect, General Thakmor, our colonies were established on uninhabited worlds, with no prior claims registered with the Galactic Council. We followed all established protocols for planetary settlement. Protocols written by soft-flesh species who have never faced true hardship," Thakmor spat. "The Korthax claim what we can take and hold. These worlds are ours by right of superior strength." Several delegates murmured their disapproval. The Galactic Council had been founded on the principle that disputes would be resolved through negotiation rather than warfare, though enforcement of that principle was often problematic when dealing with more aggressive species. Zektar leaned forward in his floating chair, his respiratory slits fluttering with anticipation. The hegemony had been looking for an excuse to limit human expansion ever since these upstart Deathworlders had joined galactic civilization. If the Korthax could be convinced to handle the human problem, it would save everyone else the trouble. "Perhaps," Zektar interjected, his voice carrying the subtle harmonics that marked high-ranking hegemony officials, "we should consider the broader implications of this dispute. The humans come from what our xenobiologists classify as a Class 12 death world. Their natural aggression and violence may make them unsuitable for peaceful coexistence with more civilized species." Maya's head turned slightly, her dark eyes focusing on Zektar with laser-like intensity. For just a moment, he felt a chill run down his elongated spine. Then she looked away, returning to her previous state of perfect stillness. Ambassador Martinez maintained her diplomatic composure despite the obvious insult. The Terran Federation has committed to peaceful exploration and cooperation with all galactic species. We have no interest in territorial expansion through conquest. No interest in conquest. General Thakmore's mandibles spread wide in what his species used as a threatening display. Then why do your colonies possess such heavily fortified defensive systems? Why do your settlers carry weapons that could level a city block? What peaceful species needs such destructive capabilities? This question hit closer to home than the human delegates would have preferred. Earth's violent history and harsh environment had indeed produced a species that other galactic civilizations found deeply unsettling. Humans were stronger, faster, and more resilient than almost any other known sapient species. Their weapons technology had developed along lines that most civilizations considered unnecessarily destructive. Even their idea of defensive systems would be classified as superweapons by galactic standards. Our defensive preparations are purely precautionary, Martinez replied carefully. Human history has taught us the importance of being prepared for any eventuality. History of violence and war, Counselor Dresk of the Pacifist Collective added, their blue-green skin shifting to darker shades of disapproval. Your species has engaged in continuous warfare for its entire recorded history. Even now, you maintain military forces that dwarf those of most galactic civilizations. Zektar saw his opening. The question before us is not simply about territorial rights, but about whether a species with such violent tendencies should be allowed to expand freely throughout galactic space. Perhaps it would be wiser to limit human colonization to a restricted zone where they can be properly monitored. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species voiced support for Zektar's proposal, particularly those who had economic interests that conflicted with human expansion. Others argued that such restrictions violated the Galactic Charter's principles of equal treatment for all sapient species. Throughout the heated discussion, Maya remained motionless in her chair. Her breathing had slowed even further, and her pulse rate dropped to levels that would have concerned a human medical team. But her eyes continued to track every speaker, recording every facial expression, every gesture, every subtle shift in body language that might reveal hidden motivations or alliances. She was doing what humans had learned to do during their violent evolution. She was hunting. Not with weapons or physical force, but with the same patient, deadly focus that had allowed her ancestors to track prey across African savannas and through dense forests. She was identifying weaknesses, noting patterns, building a comprehensive picture of the political ecosystem that surrounded her. Ambassador Martinez was fighting a losing battle, and Maya could see it in the subtle shifts of body language throughout the chamber. Too many species were afraid of humanity's potential. Too many had economic or territorial interests that would benefit from restricting human expansion. The Korthax were simply the most obvious threat, but the real danger came from the coalition of civilized species who saw humans as dangerous barbarians. General Thakmore rose again, his 4-meter frame towering over the assembly. The Korthax Empire offers a simple solution to this problem. Grant us administrative authority over the disputed worlds, and we will ensure that the human colonists are relocated to more appropriate territories. We are willing to provide them with suitable compensation for their inconvenience. Relocated at gunpoint, more likely, muttered Dr. James Wright, the human scientific attaché. Did you say something, human? Thakmore's compound eyes fixed on Wright with predatory intensity. Wright shrank back in his chair, clearly intimidated by the massive alien's attention. Nothing, General. Just commenting to my colleague. Maya's eyes narrowed slightly. She had been watching Wright throughout the session, noting his nervous habits, his defensive posturing. the way he unconsciously touched his throat whenever he felt threatened. He was exactly the kind of human that reinforced negative stereotypes about her species' supposed weakness when removed from their Deathworld environment. The debate continued for another hour, with various species proposing modifications to the Korthak's demand that amounted to the same basic outcome. Humans would be forced to abandon their colonies and accept restrictions on future expansion. The vote was scheduled for the next day, giving delegations time to consult with their governments. As the session adjourned, delegates began filing out of the chamber in their usual clusters of allied species. Maya remained seated until most of the chamber had emptied, then rose smoothly to her feet. She had been sitting motionless for over 4 hours, but showed no signs of stiffness or discomfort as she joined the human delegation. "That could have gone better," Ambassador Martinez said quietly as they walked toward the exit. "It's not over yet," Maya replied, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber. Her voice was soft, but carried an edge that made her colleagues glance at her nervously. Dr. Wright shook his head pessimistically. "Did you see how many species are supporting the Korthak's position? Even if we get some abstentions, we're looking at a 2/3 majority against us. The best we can hope for is to negotiate better terms for the relocation." Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. "Dr. Wright, do you know what the human colonies on those disputed worlds are actually mining?" Wright blinked in confusion. "Rare earth elements mostly. Some radioactive isotopes for medical applications. Nothing particularly valuable by galactic standards." "Nothing valuable," Maya repeated slowly. "And yet the Korthak's empire, which has access to thousands of worlds rich in rare elements, suddenly needs these specific 17 colonies. Interesting coincidence." Ambassador Martinez frowned. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we're missing something important about why these worlds matter to the Korthaks, and until we understand their real motivations, we're fighting the wrong battle." The human delegation made their way to their temporary quarters in the diplomatic sector of the council station. Maya's mind was already racing through possibilities, analyzing the patterns she had observed during the session. Something about this situation didn't add up, and she intended to find out what. That evening, while her colleagues attended various diplomatic receptions and informal meetings, Maya made her way to the station's central data archive. As a junior diplomat, she had limited access to the council's records, but she had learned long ago that information was often hidden in plain sight. She spent hours reviewing territorial surveys, trade records, and historical data about the disputed worlds. Most of the information confirmed what they already knew. The planets were unremarkable by galactic standards, with moderate mineral deposits and suitable conditions for human habitation. But buried deep in the geological surveys, Maya found something interesting. All 17 worlds showed signs of ancient civilizations, not recent enough to prevent colonization under galactic law, but recent enough to be archaeologically significant. More importantly, the energy signatures from these ancient sites matched patterns associated with a technology that the galactic community had been seeking for centuries: faster-than-light communication arrays that didn't rely on the expensive and limited quantum entanglement networks currently used for interstellar communication. Maya leaned back in her chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The Korthaks weren't interested in the worlds themselves. They wanted exclusive access to study the ancient technology, potentially giving them a massive advantage in both military and commercial applications. But why now? The human colonies had been established for over a year. If the Korthaks had known about the archaeological significance of these worlds, why hadn't they claimed them earlier? Maya pulled up the records of Korthak's territorial claims over the past decade, looking for patterns. What she found made her blood run cold. The Korthax had been systematically claiming worlds with similar archaeological signatures, but always through proxy conflicts or technical legal challenges. They had been careful to avoid direct confrontation with major galactic powers. Until now. The fact that they were willing to openly challenge the human colonies suggested that they had found something on one of the disputed worlds, something important enough to risk a major diplomatic incident. Maya's fingers flew across the interface as she accessed the most recent survey data from the human colonies. Most of the reports were routine, but one caught her attention. The colony on Kepler 442b had reported unusual energy readings from an ancient structure just 3 weeks ago. The readings had been dismissed as equipment malfunction, but Maya recognized the pattern from the archaeological data. Someone had activated an ancient communication array. Maya sat in the darkened archive for several minutes, considering her options. She could report her findings to Ambassador Martinez, who would attempt to use the information through normal diplomatic channels. But by the time the human government authorized a full investigation, the Korthax would have voted them off the worlds and secured exclusive access to the technology. Or she could take a more direct approach. Maya smiled grimly as she began accessing the Council's communication networks. Her fingers moved with practiced precision as she navigated through layers of security protocols, using techniques that were definitely not part of standard diplomatic training. She was about to remind the Galactic Council why humans were considered dangerous. The Chamber would learn tomorrow that you don't corner a Deathworlder and expect them to go quietly into extinction. Maya worked through the night, gathering intelligence, identifying weaknesses, and preparing for a confrontation that would either save the human colonies or end her diplomatic career. Probably both. But as she had learned during her childhood on the frontier worlds, sometimes the only way to win was to show your enemies exactly why they should be afraid of you. The Galactic Council was about to discover what happened when you threatened a species that had spent millions of years learning how to kill everything on the most dangerous planet in known space. Maya Chen was done being quiet. The next morning brought chaos to the Galactic Council's communication networks. Ambassador Zektar discovered it first when he attempted to access his private messages. Instead of his usual encrypted correspondence from hegemony intelligence services, his screen displayed detailed financial records showing massive payments from Korthax military contractors to several hegemony shell companies. The transactions were dated just days before the territorial dispute had been brought before the Council. Councillor Dresk of the Pacifist Collective found herself staring at communications between her aide and a Korthax trade negotiator, discussing how the removal of human colonies would open up lucrative mining contracts for collective companies. The messages made it clear that the collective's supposed moral objections to human expansion were entirely fabricated. Similar revelations appeared on terminals throughout the diplomatic quarter. Species that had publicly supported the Korthax position found their private communications exposed, revealing a web of bribes, trade agreements, and secret military pacts that had nothing to do with concern about human violence. The Korthax response was swift and predictable. General Thakmor stormed through the diplomatic sector with a full security detail, demanding to know which species had dared to violate the sacred trust of diplomatic communications. His mandibles clicked furiously as he proclaimed that such treachery could only come from the humans themselves. "Where is the Deathworlder girl?" he demanded as he burst into the human delegation's quarters. "She was seen accessing the archives last night. What has she done?" Ambassador Martinez stood her ground despite the intimidating presence of 4-meter-tall alien warriors filling her office. "Maya is a junior diplomat with limited archive access. She couldn't possibly have obtained the kind of information that's been released." "Don't play games with me, human," Thakmor spat. "Your species are known for their technological tricks and deceptive tactics. The girl has somehow accessed private communications across multiple species' secure networks." Dr. Wright cowered behind his desk as the Korthax soldiers swept the room, searching for evidence of human hacking equipment. They found nothing, because Maya had used nothing more sophisticated than patience, observation, and a thorough understanding of galactic psychology to gather her intelligence. Maya herself was nowhere to be found. She had left the diplomatic quarter before dawn, ostensibly to observe the morning meditation rituals at the station's multi-faith chapel. Her absence only seemed to confirm Korthak's suspicions about her involvement in the data breach. What General Thakmore didn't know was that Maya was currently sitting in the station's central observation deck, watching the chaos unfold through the chamber's live feeds while sipping synthetic coffee from a disposable cup. She had spent the night not hacking into secure networks, but doing something far more dangerous. She had applied human pattern recognition to publicly available information. Every species in the galactic community generated enormous amounts of data about their movements, communications, and transactions. Most of it was technically public record, scattered across thousands of databases and archives. The problem was that no species had the processing power or analytical skills to connect all the pieces into a coherent picture. Except humans. Maya had used techniques that were standard practice for human intelligence analysts: data mining, pattern analysis, and social network mapping. She had identified the connections between various species representatives and traced their financial relationships through publicly available trade records. Then she had simply compiled the information into easily readable reports and distributed them through the Council's own public information system. She hadn't hacked anything. She had just done what humans did naturally. She had hunted through an information ecosystem to identify her prey. The results were devastating to the coalition that had been building against humanity. Species after species found their secret agreements exposed to public scrutiny. The careful web of bribes and intimidation that the Korthax had used to build support for their territorial claims unraveled in a matter of hours. Maya checked her chronometer and finished her coffee. It was almost time for the emergency session that Supreme Arbiter Vexhan had called to address the crisis. She made her way to the chamber at a leisurely pace, noting the clusters of agitated delegates arguing in heated whispers throughout the corridors. The chamber itself was in chaos when she arrived. Representatives were shouting accusations across the floor, while their aides scrambled to contain the diplomatic fallout from the morning's revelations. Maya slipped into her seat unnoticed, resuming the same perfectly still posture that had marked her previous appearance. Supreme Arbiter Vexhan called for order with increasing desperation as the session devolved into mutual recriminations between species. The crystalline hierarchy's representatives had shifted to angry red patterns as they denied any knowledge of their trade agreements with Korthak's mining cartels. The Nebula Collective swirled with agitation as they attempted to explain their sudden change in position on human expansion rights. General Thakmore stood at the center of the chaos, his security detail forming a protective circle around him as he demanded justice for the violation of diplomatic privacy. "This attack on the sacred trust between civilized species cannot go unpunished," he declared. "The humans have proven that they cannot be trusted to respect galactic law." "With respect, General," came a quiet voice from the human section. "I think you may have that backwards." Maya rose to her feet with fluid grace, drawing every eye in the chamber. She looked impossibly small compared to the towering aliens surrounding her, but her presence seemed to fill the space with an almost predatory intensity. "The information released this morning consists entirely of public records," she continued in the same soft tone that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "Trade agreements filed with the Commerce Council, financial transfers recorded in the banking consortium's databases, communication logs automatically archived by the station's own systems." Ambassador Martinez looked surprised. She had been preparing to deny any human involvement in the data breach, but Maya was doing something far more dangerous. She was taking credit for it. "You accessed private communications," Thakmor accused, his mandibles spreading wide in threat display. Maya tilted her head slightly, a gesture that would have seemed innocent if not for the calculating look in her dark eyes. "General, are you saying that your private communications contained information about bribing council members and manipulating territorial disputes? Because I didn't access any private communications, I simply analyzed publicly available data." The distinction was lost on most of the alien delegates, but its implications sent a chill through those who understood human capabilities. Maya hadn't broken any laws or violated any systems. She had simply processed information in ways that no other species had considered possible. "Impossible," declared Councillor Vroon of the Technocratic Union. "No single individual could analyze data across that many databases. It would require quantum-level processing capabilities." Maya smiled, and several delegates unconsciously shifted away from her. The expression was perfectly human, but it carried the same predatory warmth as a tiger contemplating its next meal. "You're absolutely right, Counselor. No individual could process that much data using your technology. But human brains don't work the same way as your quantum computers. We evolved to recognize patterns, track relationships, and identify threats in complex environments. What took me 8 hours of analysis would take your best systems weeks of dedicated processing time." She gestured toward the displays showing the exposed communications. "Every species represented here generates approximately 1.3 exabytes of public data per standard day. Most of it seems unrelated, but humans excel at finding connections that others miss. We call it intuition, but it's really just pattern recognition optimized by millions of years of evolution on a world where missing subtle signs meant death." The chamber had gone completely silent. Maya's words carried implications that went far beyond the current territorial dispute. If humans could routinely analyze galactic-scale data sets to expose hidden connections and secret agreements, then no species' private business was truly safe. Zektar found his voice first. "This is exactly what we warned about. The humans possess dangerous capabilities that they've kept hidden from the galactic community. They cannot be trusted." Maya's smile widened slightly. "Ambassador Zektar, we never hid anything. Human analytical capabilities are well documented in our first contact reports. The fact that no one bothered to consider the implications isn't our responsibility." She turned to address the chamber as a whole, her voice remaining soft, but carrying an edge that made even the largest delegates pay attention. "The real question is why so many of you felt the need to hide your activities in the first place. If your positions on human expansion were based on legitimate concerns, why did you need secret payments and covert agreements to support them?" General Thakmor's rage was building to dangerous levels. His species was not known for their emotional control, and being outmaneuvered by what he saw as a weak human child was pushing him toward a berserker state that had ended previous diplomatic encounters in violence. "Enough!" he roared, his mandibles clacking together with enough force to chip concrete. "The Korthax Empire does not negotiate with terrorists and spies. You want to see what happens to species that threaten us?" Thakmor reached for the ceremonial blade at his side, a weapon that was both symbolic of his rank and fully functional for combat. Several delegates cried out in alarm as the massive alien drew the meter-long curve of sharpened chitin. Maya didn't move. She stood perfectly still as 4 meters of enraged alien warrior advanced toward her position, weapon raised and mandibles spread in a killing display that had terrified civilized species for centuries. Her human colleagues scattered, diving for cover behind their chairs or fleeing toward the exits. But Maya remained motionless, her dark eyes tracking Thakmor's approach with the same patient focus she had shown during the previous day's debate. "General," she said quietly, her voice carrying clearly across the silent chamber, "are you really sure you want to do this?" Thakmor hesitated for just a moment, confused by her lack of fear. In his experience, prey either fled or cowered when faced with Korthak's aggression. They didn't stand calmly and ask polite questions. "You should have stayed on your death world, little girl," he snarled, raising his blade for a killing strike. Maya smiled. "General, you seem to have misunderstood something fundamental about humans. We don't call Earth a death world because it's dangerous to other species. We call it a death world because it's the kind of place that produces things like us." Her hand moved faster than most of the delegates could follow. One moment she was standing empty-handed facing an armed alien warrior. The next moment, she held a small device that looked deceptively simple. A cylinder no larger than a writing stylus with a single button at one end. "This is a gravity pulse generator," Maya explained conversationally, as if she weren't facing imminent death from an enraged Korthak's warrior. "Standard emergency equipment for humans working in low-gravity environments. It generates a localized gravitational field strong enough to simulate Earth-normal conditions." Thakmor lunged forward, his blade cutting through the air where Maya had been standing. But she was no longer there. She had moved with liquid grace to his left side, the gravity generator humming softly in her hand. "The interesting thing about gravity," she continued in the same calm tone, "is that it affects everything equally. Mass, energy, molecular bonds. At the right frequency and intensity, a gravity pulse can disrupt the electron shells that hold matter together." She pressed the button. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Thakmor's blade didn't break or shatter. It simply ceased to exist as the gravitational pulse disrupted the atomic bonds holding it together. The weapon dissolved into component atoms that dispersed harmlessly into the chamber's atmosphere. But the pulse didn't stop with the blade. It continued into Thakmor's arm, causing his exoskeleton to develop hairline cracks that spread rapidly across his body. The massive alien warrior stumbled backward, suddenly aware that the small human device could turn him into scattered atoms as easily as it had destroyed his weapon. "Of course," Maya said, casually adjusting the device's settings. "Humans don't usually use gravity generators as weapons. We're a peaceful species after all. But we do believe in being prepared for any eventuality." The chamber erupted in panic as delegates realized that a human had just demonstrated the ability to disintegrate matter at the molecular level, using what appeared to be standard safety equipment. Species that had seemed invulnerable in their environmental suits or enhanced exoskeletons suddenly understood that human defensive technology operated on principles that made their own weapons obsolete. Maya stood in the center of the chaos, still holding the gravity generator, but no longer aiming it at anyone. Her message had been delivered. Humans might be newcomers to galactic civilization, but they were far from helpless. Supreme Arbiter Vexhan was frantically calling for security teams while trying to restore order to the session. Several species were demanding that humans be banned from carrying any technology into council chambers. Others were calling for a complete review of human defensive capabilities. Through it all, Maya remained perfectly calm. She had spent 13 seconds since Thakmor drew his weapon, and in that brief time, she had fundamentally altered the balance of power in galactic politics. "Now then," she said, her voice cutting through the noise with quiet authority, "perhaps we can discuss the territorial dispute in a more productive manner." The chamber gradually fell silent as delegates realized that the small human was not finished speaking. Maya held up a datapad showing the same information she had compiled about the ancient communication arrays on the disputed worlds. "General Thakmor, would you like to explain why the Korthak's Empire is so interested in 17 unremarkable human colonies? Or should I share what I discovered about your archaeological expedition to Kepler 442b? For the first time since entering the chamber, General Thakmor looked genuinely frightened. His compound eyes focused on Maya with the desperate attention of prey, recognizing a superior predator. Maya had given the Galactic Council a demonstration of human capabilities that would reshape interspecies relations for generations to come. But more importantly, she had taken control of a situation that threatened to end human expansion before it could truly begin. The Deathworlder girl had been quiet for 13 seconds. Now she was ready to finish what she had started. General Thakmore's silence stretched across the chamber like a physical presence. The massive Korthax warrior, moments before a terrifying force of nature, now stood motionless as Maya's question hung in the air. His compound eyes darted between the human girl and the exits, calculating odds that were no longer in his favor. Maya stepped forward, her movement fluid and controlled. The gravity generator remained in her hand, no longer aimed at anyone but still humming with barely contained energy. Kepler 442b, General. Your archaeological team has been there for 3 weeks now. They've been very careful to stay away from the human colony, but not careful enough to avoid our orbital sensors. She activated her data pad, projecting a holographic display that showed satellite footage of the disputed world. The images clearly depicted Korthax excavation equipment surrounding an ancient alien structure that pulsed with the same energy signatures Maya had identified in the archives. This is an architect communication node, Maya continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who held all the cards. One of the few intact examples ever discovered. The architects vanished from galactic history over 50,000 years ago, but their technology remains functional. Faster-than-light communication across unlimited distances, instantaneous data transfer, quantum-encrypted channels that can't be intercepted or decoded by any known method. The implications sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. Instantaneous communication across galactic distances would revolutionize trade, diplomacy, and military coordination. Whichever species controlled architect communication technology would possess an insurmountable advantage over all others. Councillor Vroon of the Technocratic Union leaned forward in his crystalline chair, his optical sensors focused on the projection. Impossible. Our best scientists have studied architect ruins for centuries. The technology is far beyond current understanding. Maya smiled that predatory expression that was becoming familiar to the chamber's occupants. Beyond your understanding, Counselor. But humans have certain advantages when it comes to reverse engineering ancient technology. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show detailed technical schematics that made several delegates gasp in recognition. The diagrams showed not just the architect communication node, but human modifications that had been integrated into the alien technology. You see, the architect civilization appears to have evolved on a world very similar to Earth. High gravity, dense atmosphere, extreme weather patterns. What galactic science considers impossibly robust engineering, humans recognize as standard environmental protection. We've been building technology to survive similar conditions for millennia. Ambassador Martinez stared at the display in amazement. As head of the human delegation, she should have been briefed on any major archaeological discoveries on the colony worlds. The fact that Maya possessed this information suggested that her role as a junior diplomat was far more complex than it appeared. 3 weeks ago, Maya continued, the human colony on Kepler 442b experienced what they reported as equipment malfunctions, gravity fluctuations, electromagnetic anomalies, power grid instabilities, standard effects of an architect node beginning to activate after millennia of dormancy. She paused, letting the implications sink in before delivering the killing blow. The interesting thing is that the node began activating just hours after the Korthax archaeological team arrived, almost as if their excavation had triggered some kind of automatic defense system. General Thakmore found his voice at last, though it carried none of his earlier confidence. The human colonies have no legal claim to archaeological sites. Galactic law clearly states that pre-contact ruins belong to the galactic community as a whole. You're absolutely right, General, Maya agreed pleasantly. Which is why I'm curious about why your team has been working so hard to keep their discovery secret. If this were a legitimate archaeological expedition, surely you would have registered it with the Council's Science Directorate? The chamber erupted in heated discussion as delegates realized the implications. The Korthax had been attempting to claim exclusive access to potentially the most valuable archaeological discovery in galactic history, using the territorial dispute as a cover for their real objectives. But Maya wasn't finished. She activated another display, this one showing energy readings from all 17 disputed worlds. Each planet showed similar patterns. Ancient architect sites that had remained dormant for millennia were beginning to show signs of activation. It appears that the architect communication network was designed as an integrated system, Maya explained. When one node activates, it sends awakening signals to others in the network. The Korthax discovery on Kepler 442b has triggered responses across all 17 worlds. The silence that followed this revelation was profound. 17 functional architect communication nodes would give any species unprecedented control over galactic communications. The economic and military advantages would be incalculable. Ambassador Zektar of the Hegemony was the first to grasp the full implications. You're suggesting that the human colonies were established specifically to gain access to these sites. This was planned from the beginning. Maya turned to face him, her expression unreadable. That's an interesting theory, Ambassador. It would certainly explain how a supposedly primitive species managed to identify 17 worlds with dormant architect technology when galactic science had failed to detect them for centuries. She paused, letting the suspicion build before continuing. Of course, there's another explanation. Humans might simply be better at recognizing signs of ancient technology because we evolved in similar conditions to the architects themselves. Pattern recognition that seems impossible to other species might be instinctive for us. Dr. Wright, who had been silent since the session began, finally spoke up. Maya, what exactly are you saying? Are you claiming that humans can naturally interface with architect technology? Maya's smile widened. Dr. Wright, what do you think has been happening to the human colonists on these worlds? The equipment malfunctions, the strange dreams, the reports of hearing voices in empty rooms. These aren't technical problems. They're first contact protocols. The chamber fell silent as the full implications of Maya's words sank in. She was suggesting that the architect technology was not only functional, but actively trying to communicate with the human colonists. General Thakmore's mandibles clicked frantically as he processed this information. If humans could naturally interface with architect technology, then the Korthax Empire's plans for exclusive access were not just illegal, they were impossible. The technology itself had chosen the humans as its new caretakers. This is preposterous, he declared, though his voice lacked conviction. Ancient alien technology cannot simply choose who operates it. The Korthax have superior scientists and engineers. We can unlock these secrets through proper research methods. Maya gestured again, and the holographic display showed real-time feeds from the human colonies. On world after world, the ancient architect nodes were coming online, their energy signatures growing stronger by the hour. But more importantly, the displays showed human colonists working alongside the awakening technology, somehow understanding its functions without any apparent training. The architect network has been waiting for 50,000 years, Maya said softly. Waiting for a species that could understand its true purpose. The architects didn't vanish from galactic history, General. They evolved beyond the need for physical existence and uploaded themselves into their communication network. They've been watching galactic civilization develop, waiting for a species that could serve as their physical agents in the material universe. The implications were staggering. Maya was suggesting that humanity had made contact not just with architect technology, but with the architects themselves. The most advanced civilization in galactic history had chosen humans as their representatives among the younger species. Ambassador Martinez stepped forward, her diplomatic training finally catching up with the situation. Maya, if what you're saying is true, this is far beyond the scope of a territorial dispute. We need to contact Earth immediately and inform them of these developments. Maya shook her head. Ambassador, Earth has been in communication with the Architect Network for several months now. Why do you think I was assigned to this delegation? Junior diplomats don't usually possess detailed knowledge of xenoarchaeology and advanced physics. The truth hit the chamber like a physical blow. Maya wasn't a junior diplomat at all. She was a human agent, specifically trained to handle first contact with the architect consciousness. Her presence at the council, her detailed knowledge of the archaeological sites, her ability to analyze galactic-scale data patterns, all of it had been planned from the beginning. The Terran Federation has been negotiating with the architect consciousness for months, Maya continued. They have offered humanity access to their technology in exchange for serving as their representatives in physical space. The architects want to rejoin galactic civilization, but they need physical agents to interact with matter-based species. General Thakmore's rage finally overcame his fear. Treachery! The humans have made secret agreements with alien powers. This violates every principle of the Galactic Charter. Maya's expression hardened, and for a moment, the chamber glimpsed the predatory intelligence that had allowed humanity to survive on their death world. General, the Galactic Charter guarantees every species the right to form diplomatic relationships with other civilizations. The fact that the architects predate galactic civilization doesn't invalidate their sovereignty. She gestured, and the holographic display shifted to show legal documents that had been filed with the Council's administrative offices just hours earlier. The Architect Collective has formally applied for recognition as a sovereign civilization under Article 7 of the Galactic Charter. The Terran Federation has agreed to serve as their physical representatives until they can establish their own material infrastructure. The legal implications were overwhelming. If the architects were recognized as a sovereign civilization, they would have the same rights as any other species. Their technology would belong to them, not to the galactic community. And their chosen representatives, humanity, would have exclusive access to the most advanced technology in known space. Councillor Dresk of the Pacifist Collective raised a trembling appendage. This cannot be legal. Ancient ruins belong to all species under galactic law. No single civilization can claim exclusive rights to archaeological sites. Maya nodded respectfully. You're absolutely right, Counselor. Archaeological sites belong to the galactic community, but active communication nodes operated by a living civilization belong to that civilization. The Architect Network isn't a ruin anymore. It's a functioning technological infrastructure operated by the Architect Collective. Supreme Arbiter Vexhan had been silent throughout Maya's revelations, but now she spoke with the authority of her office. This council cannot make such a determination without extensive legal review. The recognition of the Architect Collective as a sovereign civilization would require formal hearings, expert testimony, and a full vote by all member species. Of course, Maya agreed. The Architect Collective understands galactic legal processes. They've been observing them for 50,000 years, after all. They're prepared to wait for formal recognition. She paused, her expression becoming slightly less diplomatic. However, they've also made it clear that any attempts to forcibly access their technology or interfere with their chosen representatives will be considered acts of war against a sovereign civilization. The threat hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Maya was suggesting that the most advanced civilization in galactic history was prepared to defend humanity against any species that threatened their partnership. The implications for galactic power structures were revolutionary. General Thakmor made one final attempt to salvage his empire's position. The Korthax Empire demands equal access to this technology. We reject any human monopoly on architect communication systems. Maya's smile returned, cold and predatory. General, you're welcome to request formal diplomatic relations with the Architect Collective once they achieve recognition. Of course, you might want to consider how they feel about species that attempt to steal their property through military force. She gestured, and the display showed new energy readings from the architect nodes. The power levels were climbing rapidly across all 17 worlds, far beyond anything that galactic science considered safe for technological systems. The Architect Collective has been very patient with your archaeological expedition on Kepler 442b, Maya continued. But their patience has limits. I'd suggest withdrawing your team before they decide to demonstrate why their civilization survived for 50,000 years while others fell into extinction. The implied threat was unmistakable. The architects possessed technology so advanced that they could exist as pure consciousness while maintaining control over physical systems. If they decided to eliminate threats to their human partners, no galactic military could stop them. General Thakmor stared at the energy readings with growing horror. The power levels climbing on the display were beyond anything in Korthak's experience. His archaeological team was working directly adjacent to a system that could apparently generate unlimited energy from unknown sources. This session is adjourned, Supreme Arbiter Vexhan announced, her voice cutting through the chamber's stunned silence. All territorial claims are suspended pending legal review of the Architect Collective's sovereignty application. As delegates began filing out in confused clusters, Maya remained standing in the human section. She had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. A single individual had fundamentally altered the balance of power between species using nothing more than information, analysis, and carefully timed revelations. Ambassador Martinez approached her with a mixture of amazement and concern. Maya, or whoever you really are, what happens now? Maya's predatory smile softened into something more genuinely human. Now, Ambassador, humanity takes its place as a major power in galactic civilization. The Architect Collective has technologies that will revolutionize everything from medicine to space travel. They're willing to share them with species that prove worthy of trust. She looked out at the dispersing delegates, many of whom were already frantically contacting their home governments about the day's revelations. But they've also made it clear that species which threaten their chosen representatives will find themselves cut off from technological advancement for the foreseeable future. Dr. Wright approached hesitantly, still processing everything he had witnessed. So, the territorial dispute? Resolved, Maya replied simply. The Korthax Empire will withdraw their claims and their archaeological team. The 17 worlds will remain under human administration as representatives of the Architect Collective. And General Thakmor will spend the rest of his career explaining to his superiors how he managed to threaten the most powerful civilization in galactic history. Through the chamber's massive viewports, the lights of the galactic capital stretched across the star-filled void. Ships from hundreds of worlds moved through the space lanes, carrying trade goods, diplomats, and travelers between the scattered civilizations that made up the galactic community. But the community had changed forever in the span of a single morning. A quiet girl from a death world had sat still for hours, analyzed patterns that others had missed, and then calmly demonstrated that humanity possessed capabilities that redefined what it meant to be dangerous. The Galactic Council would spend years adjusting to the new reality that Maya had created. Humanity was no longer a minor species seeking acceptance among their betters. They were the chosen representatives of the galaxy's original architects, armed with technology that made their primitive weapons look like children's toys. Maya Chen had been quiet for 13 seconds when threatened with violence. In that brief moment, she had broken more than just the chamber's sense of order. She had shattered the assumptions that had governed galactic civilization for millennia. The Deathworlder girl had reminded the galaxy why her species had survived on the most dangerous planet in known space. Not through violence or aggression, but through intelligence, adaptability, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to reveal their true capabilities. As Maya gathered her materials and prepared to leave the chamber, she reflected on the events that had brought her to this moment. The Architect Collective had chosen humanity not because they were violent, but because they were survivors. They had evolved on a world that demanded constant adaptation, pattern recognition, and the ability to find solutions that others considered impossible. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when you gave such a species access to technology that had been perfected over 50,000 years of development. Maya smiled as she walked toward the exit, already planning the next phase of humanity's integration with their new architect partners. The territorial dispute had been just the beginning. Now came the real work of reshaping galactic civilization to accommodate the return of its original architects. The quiet girl from the Deathworld had spoken, and the galaxy would never be the same.